Yes, sir, we are now live.
All right. Good evening. It's November 4, 2019. This is a meeting of the Council Rock School District Policy Committee, and I'm chairing this evening Ed Tate, member of School Board. We'll go around the table real quickly and introduce those who are in the room.
Mary Ann McKee, School Board.
Robert Grazer, Superintendent.
Chuck Lambert, Director, Special Services.
Matt Frederickson, IT Director, and I have a couple of points of order for this evening's meeting. If I may, Mr. Tate? I'll be speaking on behalf of Mrs. Taylor. The policy we'll be going over for her was one that we had gone over before. There's a slight language change, so she wanted the board to request we bring it back with those changes. I'll also be speaking for Mr. Stone this evening to cover his policies. And we were wondering if you would, bless you, if you would be okay with us starting with Dr. Lambert.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's on the phone, please?
Mike Thorward.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Thorward. Anyone else?
Joe Hidalgo.
Hello, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
And good evening, Ed Salomon.
Thought so. Thank you, Ed, for joining us. Anyone else? No, good. We got a full house, though. So we will start with Dr. Lambert. That would be 718, correct?
Correct. And that is the policy on service animals in schools. I did not make changes in the system to these yet because they were relatively minor, and I just wanted to wait and see if everyone is in agreement before I go in, and then I'll make the changes. In that policy, this is something that's become quite a bit more common than in the past. The only question I have, and where it says delegation of responsibility, that the superintendent or designee shall develop and disseminate administrative regulations. I have no problems or concerns with it. I just don't know if it's necessary to have regulations on that.
We do not know.
This is a new policy, not in existence before. I mean, I don't know if it's common for always have that. We can
No, not always. Only if there are, practical procedures or a protocol that needs to be developed. Absent that, we shouldn't have an AR, I don't think.
And in these situations, they're all very, very different, so it's kind of hard to come up with how you're going to enforce these situations, because they're all very different.
It's mostly case by case then,
Correct.
as you typically handle kids with special needs.
Correct.
But Dr. Lambert, by and large, I know we've had service animals previously in the schools. Is this very much in keeping with what we've done in the past?
Correct, yes.
This is a new policy, by the way, and the language comes from PSBA. As most of you know, they've been working with us for the past 3 years on this process. Anybody have any other questions?
I'm good with it.
I like the idea that we will exclude an animal who is not housebroken. All right, no more questions or comments. We will move 718 forward to the full board with our recommendation of approval. Next is 819, suicide awareness, prevention, and response.
So in that policy, I have made changes in the system to reach. Some of them are just because they were a little bit more complex, but I can certainly go over those. Did
you add that definition? Yep. Is that what I'm seeing?
First change I made was under referral procedures, and it was really just wording where it refers to the district behavioral health professional, not terminology that we use. I just changed that to a student services staff member.
Ed, to your question, I think that PSBA had changed that definition earlier with the bold print.
This was a pre-existing policy, correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see the bold text, these are where PSBA has made modifications to the wording in our previous policy.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Frazier.
And that's our current protocol.
Makes sense.
Then under methods of intervention, if you go slide down there, I changed address the development of a safety plan for students to we shall include a protocol for staff when working with a student who is identified as being at risk. You'll notice in a couple other places as we move forward, I've taken language out about developing a safety plan only because that is not something we typically do. We refer the students out to an outside professional who's working with the family for them to develop that safety plan. What we do work on is how we're going to manage the situation in school. So I tried to capture that with that wording.
So when you say include developing, that makes sense, thank you. But when you say include developing a protocol for staff to follow when working with students, does that mean an individualized protocol?
Correct.
Good.
I have a question, just a clarification in here. It does reference under methods of intervention, parents being notified, and we know that professional employees are mandated reporters. So you reference here that should the student's risk status be the result of abuse or neglect, then children and youth would be notified. But how do these two things meld together, the parent notification and children and youth notification? Does one precede the other? Under procedures for student at risk, second paragraph.
Yeah, and under the mandated reporting guidelines, our first act always must be to notify Childline.
Okay, so that people would understand.
Correct. And also, when we notify Childline of a referral, we are asked by children and youth in almost all cases to not also notify the parents.
Right, so then it would be
So it would
their
just be the
purview
child,
too.
correct.
Okay, just so I understand the protocol for that. Thank you.
Then if you slide down above students with disabilities, where that again, I just took that out because that's referring to the safety plan, which again is something we would not do. It's something we would refer out to have happen. And I was also striking the part with about students with disabilities because it's really redundant with other information and other policies and a requirement that we would follow. All right, and under documents, are we okay?
Yeah.
Under, down Matt, to documentation, or up maybe from where you are. I'm sorry, that's, the only question I had then again is about the administrative regulations, whether we want that to be in there. We do have protocols that we follow, so I guess those could be considered administrative regulations.
Yeah, I would say so.
And then, under response to suicide attempt, I added as appropriate only because there are certain situations where we can't do that. The student may have been placed someplace or the family's unavailable to us. So I just wanted it to be noted that we would certainly make those efforts, but we would do it as appropriate. And then going down that, I again changed the further, keep going down, where it says behavioral health professional, I changed that to student services. I took out the suicide prevention coordinator because we don't have such a role. And instead of saying that we would meet with the families, I said communicate with the families because, again, there's certain circumstances we're not able to do that. And then I said again, when we would coordinate with the outside agencies when possible, we make every effort to do so, but there's times where we just can't get that return cooperation.
Can you start the line about reentry?
I guess I took that up because I wasn't exactly sure what it's referring to. I mean, if it's referring to, I guess I took it out because of the disability part. If they're talking about referring it to the IEP team, that's something we would do as a requirement anyway.
Oh, okay.
Not saying any students referring to students with
Right.
disabilities.
Yep.
So we have other policies that govern us on that one. And then if you continue down that, the reentry procedures, or no,
Report.
yeah, there are, we did that, I'm sorry, go ahead, scroll down. And the reporting procedures, I just, personally don't know that it's appropriate for us to be reporting all of that information to the superintendent. Not that we don't trust your confidentiality, I just don't think it's a necessary step. Much of that falls under our SAP guidelines, and if there's, strict rules and guidelines about the confidentiality of that information. So I was striking
I
that
would
part.
agree.
And then the bottom part, I just moved things around to make it flow nicer, I thought, and I added Lenape Valley Mobile Crisis and Safe to Say, since those are two things that are specific to us in the event that someone were to look there for that information. And that's what I have on that policy.
Lenape Valley Mobile Crisis Intervention. That's literally mobile.
Correct, they will come out almost immediately. If they're, I mean, depending on, we had a call recently where they were overflowed with referrals at that moment. It was going to be a couple hours, but they will typically get out there pretty quickly.
Marvelous. Are there questions on the phone?
None here.
I do. As far as the report procedure, is that something that's recommended by the state, and we're just going to remove that because it seems like that might be a good tool in helping the child?
Matt, can you scroll back up to that, please?
If we're not documenting what we're doing to help, then that might not be, that's the tool they might be missing going forward.
Well, the first part, the effective documentation assists in preserving the safety of the student. I mean, we can leave that in, I'm fine with it. It's what we currently do. It's what our staff guidelines have us doing. The same thing with the second part on the district employees taking notes.
I'm
Third
fine
part,
with it.
yeah, the part I was mostly concerned about was that last, the suicide prevention coordinator shall provide the superintendent with a copy of all reports and documentation. I'm not sure you would even want that to happen, Dr. Fraser. So I can leave the
That's
first,
fine with me.
and we can leave the first three in. They're currently happening. I just didn't know that they needed to be in the policy.
I think that makes sense.
We certainly can.
Keep the first three and strike the last one.
All right. Thank you.
I'm going to make these changes.
Okay, Joe?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Other questions or comments? If not, we'll move 819 forward, suicide awareness, prevention, and response with our recommendation for approval of the full board. The next is automated external defibrillator, AED, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR.
So in that policy, again, I didn't make them in the system yet, but the only thing that I was changing is under guidelines, it says a core team. That's not terminology that we use. So I was just changing that to say a list of staff members trained in CPR and AED shall be updated annually and maintained by the nursing coordinator. And then went on to say that because we don't have that specific team, designated staff members shall be provided opportunities for training and retraining as required.
So is there required training, or is there as required refer to retraining?
Both.
Okay.
And
So like if you're,
so, for example,
coach or athletic director,
correct.
trainer.
There's also going to be required training for students being implemented in the near future, so.
I thought
But it, depending on the function, the frequency of that retraining might vary.
Yes. We have one in every school, an AED.
Yes.
Marvelous.
And I don't know if we need, again, the administrative regulations.
I wouldn't think so.
I mean, the policy's pretty clear in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right.
The only other thing I was would scroll down, Matt, if you would. I would strike that last paragraph, automated external defibrillator units may be used by all members of the district's core team. It seems, I mean, the purpose of the AEDs is that anybody can use it, so I don't know, it seems just kind of unnecessary language.
I would vote for striking that.
Okay.
Marion?
Yes.
Questions, comments? Pretty straightforward. I'm glad we have one in every school. Naloxone.
So this policy refers to treatment for an opioid overdose. I just changed some wording with our communication with our nursing coordinator because I didn't know what it meant, nor did she. So it's administered, in that very first part, administered doses of an opioid antagonist, and it says, and other facilities, specifically naloxone. We were changing it to just simply opioid antagonists such as naloxone. And if you scroll down, Matt, to the guidelines, and Robert, you could maybe help me here a little bit. That seems burdensome, and I guess I could check to see if it's a requirement. I did look at where the footnotes were sending us to, and I didn't see it, but it's...
Which, I'm sorry?
The guidelines, and which is talking about notifying on an annual basis parents of the drug, the symptoms. I'm not sure even how that would occur.
Matt, what are the citations there, 1 and 2?
The paragraphs that they're on talk about protection from
Right.
civil liability and criminal prosecution. So imagine that's what those refer to.
Correct.
But the first 3 paragraphs have no
footnotes.
links.
Right.
So my guess is they are not required by law.
And I read those 1 and 2, unless I misread them. I didn't take them to say that you're required to notify parents and community.
Yeah, I would agree with Matt's interpretation there. We have latitude on 1 through 3, but seemingly not on 4 and 5.
If you want, I can run that by Rob to see.
Yeah, just to make sure, and it wouldn't be burdensome to include it in the high school handbook, would it?
I mean, I guess we could put it on the website as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the public might be interested.
All right, so then I'll just leave it, and we'll get it on the website, and I don't know about the handbooks we can talk about.
Yeah, we can bring Andy into that conversation, principals.
So you're going to bounce it off Rob and make sure that it's worded okay, and then we'll move it forward for approval by the board, and then internally we'll decide where the best place is to post it so it's publicly available.
Yep. Perfect.
Great, thank you.
And the only other recommended change to that was under standing orders from the school physician, the last paragraph, the standing order shall be maintained. I would change that to the nursing coordinator's office. I don't believe your office probably maintains other
That's right.
standing orders, so that would be more consistent with what our current practice is. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Any questions, comments on naloxone? If not, we'll move it forward with our recommendation for approval. And Dr. Lambert has done his duty for tonight.
My wife will be happy.
All right. We might as well jump to the top. Thank you. Thank you. 702, gifts, grants, donations.
Do we want to do naming first?
Shall we? That's fine by me.
701.1?
It is, isn't it?
And I think it makes sense, because
Yeah.
these 2 policies actually, to some extent anyway, flow together. So, 701.1, naming school district facilities. Of course, this has been an existing policy. What PSBA has done here is actually not make any changes whatsoever to the existing policy. So that's why you don't see anything bolded in there. And also noteworthy is that there was, well, I guess the only change that PSBA did is that they added a procedure section. So we'll get to that piece because I have some suggested changes to that. Did consult with several peer policies from peer districts who are highly respected, and so that has informed some of the changes here. So the guidelines that you're seeing here, 1 through 5, 1 through 4 were already in our existing policy. Number 2 talks about naming a facility or a school for a geographic location, which of course we already do. Number 3 is that it may be named after a person, which we already do. And the addition in number 3 is that facilities will not be named for persons who are currently employed by the district or active in its operations, or those who currently hold any public office. And then to further that, to eliminate spontaneous or emotional response, nominations will not be considered until 5 years after the service, contribution, or death of the individual. So, all sports, Hall of Fames, there's always a waiting period before someone is eligible. Similar concept here. So that is the recommended addition to number 3. Number 4, again, which was already in our policy, may be named after major contributors to the district from a financial standpoint. And then number 5 is something that I suggest we add in terms of forward-looking after a facility has already been named. So this basically suggests that in the board's executive discretion, that the naming of a facility after any individual or organization, if that entity is no longer consistent with the ideals and values of the district or would otherwise negatively impact the reputation or image of the district, then the district may revoke such naming of the facility. I think that's just a protection that is necessary from a reputational standpoint.
That has actually happened at several universities.
Right. So that's a suggested add. So that's the guidelines section.
The 5-year waiting period was not in our current, it is not in our current policy.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
I saw that when I benchmarked about 3 years ago when we were talking about naming, and 5 years seemed to me to be a reasonable period of time.
Yeah, I thought so as well. I saw 4 and 5 out there, but 5 was probably the most prevalent.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's that set of recommendations. And then again, this procedure section is new relative to our existing policy. So added here is that requests should be submitted to the superintendent or designee, which is consistent with our other policies. And then second paragraph, I have struck the sentence that the timing and decision about naming requests for buildings shall be at the discretion of the board. And my rationale in doing that is just to ensure that this board or any future board provides sufficient time and opportunity for a public community weigh-in. So the suggested verbiage here is if the board decides to consider naming or naming a school or a school name change, that there will be a 1-month period of public comment before the school board's formal vote on that proposed name change. So just making sure that a board engages the community before taking that step. And then the other piece that I will note is I have not changed this, and I wouldn't recommend that the board change this, but the board should know that you do have the purview to change this, and that's the final sentence, where it's saying that any name or renaming of a facility must be passed by a 2/3 majority vote. That is not school code. So school code would allow this to be the typical simple majority. A 5-4 vote would allow it. Because of the import of this, the magnitude of this, PSBA is recommending a 2/3 majority vote. I would tend to support that.
I think I've seen that elsewhere.
Yeah, I believe you probably have, because I know I did in the research that I've done. I think it's, I think there's sound logic to it. If the board doesn't want to go in that direction, it is changeable, again, because it is not school code, and of course, any future board could also make that change.
So would that two-thirds majority vote also apply if a name were to be revoked?
Yes,
It would.
it would. Yeah, because it's to name or to rename, so in that case, we would be renaming it. It would require a two-thirds majority vote, which again, I think is a protection, to have 6 out of 9 instead of a simple majority.
I have a question, if I may. I'm just not clear under the guidelines number 4. I'm not understanding what the financial value of naming rights based on the market. I don't understand what that would entail. Can you help me to understand that?
Yeah, I'll try. This is not a change. This is word for word the language that we have now. So I think that what this language is getting at is that, you know, in any given point in time, the market value of naming is going to fluctuate. So what the market value, what a reasonable or acceptable dollar amount might have been 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago is different than what it is today. So this is simply saying that in the board's evaluation of any potential contributor, any potential donor, the board is going to evaluate that request or potential donation in light of the current market conditions.
So we would benchmark that, locally with surrounding districts?
So when we did the turf field,
Yes.
at North, they were looking for placards to be mounted on the signs around the turf field. They actually brought in a couple of consultants, 3. They brought in 3 different consultants to do presentations on what the current value of those placards were in terms of how much should businesses be paying for them based on our geographical area, national settings. So they provided that information to us. So in other words, you know, one of the pizza Giuseppe's is getting charged $5, and then insurance companies getting charged $300. You know, placard costs on average in our area are going for $500, and that's for, by the way, a 1-year term or a 2-year term or a 3-year term.
So, Marion, I think that part of what you're probably getting at here is that this language is vague. I presume that it's intentionally vague, you know, from a historical Council Rock standpoint as well as from a PSBA, not changing that, just to allow the board to have some latitude and to do its due diligence as a potential donor or contributor steps forward.
I like the idea that it's mandating doing the due diligence, so that it's just not a one-off negotiation where somebody comes in and says, you know, it requires us to do some benchmarking.
Right, and that's easier for me to understand the example you gave, Matt, than
Yeah.
if someone wants to rename a high school or someone wants to, that's harder for me to understand, but I appreciate the explanation.
On the phone, does anybody have any questions? Our facilities chair is on the phone.
He is, and, you know, this seems straightforward to me.
Good.
It gives us flexibility, but still, I like the checks and balances Robert has proposed.
I have a question. Robert, sorry.
Yes.
For Mr. Cox, maybe, if someone's going to give a substantial amount of money, I would think that there may be a contract that they would want us to engage in, perhaps, maybe. And number 5 provides a good guideline for us, and it's, you know, I don't have a problem with it, but I'm wondering if Robert would have anything to say, or if you had that reviewed with him as far as, like, if we enter into a contract with somebody, obviously, there would be stipulations in there, I would guess.
Yeah, Joe, I think you're correct on that. And to answer your direct question, yes, Rob Cox has looked at this policy. We had discourse on this today. We did not talk specifically about a contract, but certainly anything when we're talking about naming a school or any major portion of a school, we would certainly want to enter into a written agreement around that. And that is part of the point, and you're going to see this in the next policy as well, where we use some of this very similar, in fact, some of it is verbatim language. And it's important that we have it in the policy so that people understand this when they're making the donation. And it would also be important that we would lift this language and use it in any written agreement, contract, or otherwise that that donor signs off on, so that they understand that whether it's them individually or the group they represent or the business that they represent, if things are no longer consistent with the values and ideals of the school district, or just not going to shed positive light on the school district, that the board does have sole discretion to be able to rescind that naming.
Well, good, and it's there before the contract even was, we're putting it out there now.
Yeah, exactly.
Appreciate it.
Exactly.
All right, if there are no other questions or comments, then we'll move 701.1 forward to the full board for its consideration with our recommendation for approval. And the next one is 702, related gifts, grants, donations.
All right, thank you. So this is a policy that Doug Taylor and I worked collaboratively on, and as you can see, PSBA is recommending a number of very simple language changes as bolded there. We are not suggesting any revision to any of those bolded verbiage revisions. The guidelines section, interestingly, if you look at our existing policy or historical policy, we do have a guideline section, and PSBA took that out. So not sure why they took it out, but they did, and we have put that back in, and so that's why you're seeing all of that red there. So really, the first three pieces valued at under $1,000. That decision can be made by the building principal. Between $1,000 and $5,000, that decision can be made by the superintendent, and then in excess of $5,000 requires approval of the board. It's exactly how we've historically operated, and it's precisely how we suggest that we continue to operate. That next paragraph, that larger paragraph in red, is a new paragraph that Doug added that really just kind of gives us some protections in terms of what folks are, and more importantly, aren't able to do without board approval. So we do recommend that language. And then the final piece with this is this numbered list, and we already had a numbered list that went through 1 through 6, and now we're still 1 through 6. A couple pieces that I would point out to you that we have added. Under number 1, the essence of number 1 is that any signage or other kind of recognition, of visual recognition, that the advertisement component of this would not exceed 20% of the overall structure. So if you picture a scoreboard, the maximum amount of space that could be taken up by whoever the donor is 20%. We did add a sentence here that the board may consider donor recognition that exceeds this 20% threshold on a case-by-case basis. And the rationale for that is in the scoreboard, because I don't think anybody would want a scoreboard that has more than 20% taken up by whoever is providing the money. But if you picture a placard or something like that, now it would certainly make sense for not only 20%, but maybe 100% or upwards of 100% to be represented by that group. So it's an opportunity to give the board latitude, but it's something that the board may consider, not must do, and so the board would be able to make that decision and have those considerations on a case-by-case basis. And then the other piece that I'll point to is number 5. So really this language had ended with the phrase, the life of the gift. So all signage on tangible property, according to the terms of this policy, shall be permitted for the life of the gift. We have added language thereafter, saying provided the donor remains consistent with the ideals and values of the district and would not negatively impact the reputation or image of the district. So you just saw that language in the naming policy. We lifted that verbatim. And then to continue, and also provided that any business making a donation remains as a reputable business at the board's discretion. So, first of all, let's make sure the business continues in operation. And second fold, let's make sure that if in fact it's doing so, that it is remaining reputable and thus not creating any negative light on our Council Rock brand. So those are the suggested changes. Most everything else in here, as I said, is really coming back from the existing policy because it has worked well for us, and we would like to see those guidelines continue to be in place.
Looks good. I wonder about number 6. It says all signage must be recommended by the superintendent and approved by the board. Is that too broad?
I don't think so. I think what it does is that language that it has to be recommended by me, it allows me to stop some of these requests from reaching the board. So, you know, if we have something that just isn't consistent with what we want, or the dollar value doesn't match what the request is, then I'll be able to, or by extension, Doug will be able to stop some of those from even reaching the board. Of course, I would inform the board of any of those kinds of situations so that you could guide me if you choose to. But it would stop some of the ones that would not be seriously considered from needing to occupy the time and space of the board.
I'm good.
Mr. Facilities?
All good here.
All right. Hearing no objection, we'll move, thank you, Dr. Fraser. 702, gifts, grants, donations on the full board with our recommendation of approval. That takes us
Can we
to...
jump to 909?
Sure.
And Dr. Fraser can, if he wants to take
Yeah.
off, he can.
I'll stay, but I appreciate staying in the flow.
All right.
All right, so policy 909 is what we're looking at. Title of this policy is Municipal Government Relations. We have had this policy, although it is now much more substantial than what it was. Really, the old policy, historical policy, only had a purpose and authority section. So we still have those two pieces. You see one simple word change in the purpose. You see the word residents in place of citizens in authority. So for those of you watching at home, that's really where the historical policy ended. So everything thereafter in bold is new language. This language makes sense to me. I don't have any suggested changes. I'll just point out a couple highlights for this policy, and that's the beginning of that next paragraph. The board, of course, is an independent body, has no statutory relationship with any other governmental bodies. However, the board may, and of course does, cooperate with local government units and other appropriate organizations. And then jumping down 2 paragraphs, the board advocates joint expenditures of district and municipal or county funds to provide facilities from which the entire community may derive benefits. And of course, historically, we've done that, case in point, Marina and Welch, with Northampton Township, among others. So I think that's a good addition. Top of page 2 talks about the superintendent and each local police department entering into this memorandum of understanding, this MOU. This already happened. It historically has happened. In fact, it's required per the Safe Schools Act. So we actually have one of those for each of the 4 municipalities where we have schools residing in them, and they are specific to each school. So no recommended changes in this policy relative to what PSBA has provided to us.
I like it.
Yeah, they're nice additions.
Yeah.
PSBA did well by us here.
I'm good.
I like the idea that the line about the board shall neither seek special consideration nor assume costs that properly fall outside its jurisdiction, to remind us that, you know, there are limits to our expenditures.
Indeed.
Yeah, good.
Gentlemen on the phone?
No, I'm good.
All right.
I'm good as well, thanks, Ed.
Yep, 900. We'll move forward with our recommendation.
909.
That's 909, yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the 900 section. Which do you want to tackle next?
So now I think we can go in order. 824?
What would be 824, yeah.
This policy was brought to the board before when Mrs. Taylor did her policy. The item in this policy that was in question was paragraph 16. And this is the language that Christine did meet with all of the other educational leaders. She met with Andy, Sue, and Chuck, and they came up with this language, and everyone seems to be okay with it. Some minor tweaks that the board has requested. It's on page 3 of 6.
Yeah.
And that, you guys...
I remember, we had a long
Yeah.
discussion.
Yes,
We did.
good
Yeah.
discussion on that. Yeah.
Any questions or comments from our electronic colleagues? Hearing none, we'll move 824 on to the full board with our recommendation. Gets us to 810,
Sorry,
correct?
I'm sorry, just one quick
Yeah.
question on this. And I think I had asked this before, and forgive me if I've forgotten the answer. How will this be communicated to staff? Because this is a very in-depth policy that affects what they do every day. How will this be communicated out?
So Christine does a monthly newsletter to all employees, and she will either do something like that, or she'll send it to leadership and work with leadership to get it out to staff. She has done a couple of different ways to get things out, but the newsletter has been her, of late, way that she announces stuff. And also, if a policy change pertains to a particular area, like the gift policy that Bill Stone did a couple of months ago.
Mhm, mhm.
A lot of teachers don't bump up against vendors, but almost all the IT department does. So she asked me to communicate it out to all the IT folk, which I did for her on her behalf. So it will get communicated, and it'll probably get communicated in multiple ways.
That's great, thanks for telling me that.
And it's, for something like this, it'll be both ways.
Good.
It'll come from building leadership and from the newsletter.
Maybe.
Hey, Ed.
Yeah.
I apologize if I missed this during the conversation. With this policy, is this something that we should consider having the employees sign and physically receive a copy of this policy?
Is this, this is a new policy.
Matt, can you go back to the piece that we just changed?
Suggestion. I like the suggestion. Let's talk about the feasibility.
Where the red font is. Ed, it's a great question. I don't know that it's necessary with this policy. This is, to me, as much as anything else, this policy is actually protecting the teacher, because our teachers, while they wear many, many, many hats, they should not be caught in the position or find themselves in the position where they're trying to deal with very difficult issues on their own anyway. So this is actually telling them what they should do, which is to get this information into the right hands, which is typically going to be the school counselor. And then at the end of this policy, there is a training component to this, and above that, you see that there's a disciplinary component to this. So any employee who violates this policy, now, you know as well as I do that these kinds of situations aren't always black and white, that there's a huge gray area. So I think the language that we have in here, coupled with the fact that most of these situations are going to be more gray as opposed to black or white, I don't know that it's necessary, given this language, given the training that will take place, for us to have folks sign off on this one. Certainly, if the board feels differently, we can work this into this policy. But I think we are pretty well covered with how this policy is already laid out for us.
I mean, obviously, I'll defer to the administration. I just want to make sure that, you know, they understand the content of the policy, that it's there for both sides,
Right.
and that it doesn't get lost in translation in an email or just somewhat, you know, looked over during a training policy. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's a great question.
Thank you for asking, Ed. That is a good point. And, you know, I've personally gone through the training, and there's a lot of mandatory training that pertains to this kind of issue. And I think it's interesting that you've pointed out that this is much for the protection of
It
staff.
really is.
Yeah, there's limits.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? No, we'll move 824 then on to the full board with our recommendation for approval. 810.1?
Yes.
School bus drivers and school commercial motor vehicle drivers.
So, Mr. Stone could not be here this evening because of a family commitment that came up at the last minute, which happens when you have two young children.
Yeah?
So he asked me to read a few things. So 810.1, he says this is an important policy that codifies much of the law around how drivers are to behave. It ensures the safety of our bus drivers, and even though we outsource the first student, the policy still applies. He has all three policies, 810.1, 810.2, and 810.3 have been reviewed by Mr. Cox. Some of the highlights of the policy is that drivers shouldn't be texting, but they can use their GPS navigation system while the bus is in motion. There's going to be a minor change to the language in all three of these that specifically states while the vehicle is in motion, and then they can text if it's necessary, if the bus is actually stopped. Mr. Cox suggested we put that in there. It talks about background checks and drug alcohol testing requirements, and we also wanted to mention that the transportation team is continually refining the system for maintaining this information so that we can ensure that we are compliant.
And we accepted PSBA's language without significant changes.
He was fine with it. There is going to be, as I said earlier, there's going to be a minor tweak about the cell phone usage that only when the vehicle is stopped and is required, like if they're in a bus accident or something like that.
And to Mr. Solomon's point, how does this get disseminated to the drivers? Do we rely on...
It's the first student, they're responsible.
Okay. Well, we have a shortage of bus drivers. Are we reasonably satisfied with the performance of our drivers?
For the most part, yes. With any group you have exceptions.
Yeah.
But the norm of our group is, they are outstanding, committed, dedicated, love our kids, do a great job.
We heard that in the context of changes to bus routes.
Yes.
People were complimentary about bus drivers.
Yes.
So largely this is implemented by first student.
Yes.
Okay.
Questions or comments? That's three policies in one. that we're looking at. And if you
Well, I have more comments for dot two and for dot three.
Good, all right, then tell us about dot two, please.
810.2 cameras. This policy allows us, if we should desire to put cameras in the vehicles, that we can. It's been discussed, but we have not, there are no imminent plans currently to put cameras in buses. Buses are wired for cameras, but we don't currently have the equipment. They have budgeted approximately $75,000 for cameras, and they're not sure whether or not that's something they want to implement in the future. But evidently, there hasn't been a high enough demand.
So is it reasonable to have a policy without implementing cameras?
I think it's a good idea, so if we decide during the year we need to do something, we don't have to create the policy, initiate it, we can just go ahead and, if we need, since the buses are wired, we could just get rid of the camera if we need to and rotate it among buses if we need to.
Yeah. I wonder how far 75,000 would go.
I think further than you think.
Yeah, they're not very expensive, huh?
No.
They do say that they do have 6 cameras now, sorry, I apologize. He says, we have about 6 cameras that will rotate through vehicles at principal's request if there is a behavioral issue.
Oh, good. All the more reason.
Ed, you don't need them in every bus, you need the threat of them in every bus.
Yeah? Where's the
Matt,
problem?
not to put you on the spot, because I know this isn't yours, and I have not had a chance to go through this particular one. Do we have anything in here? I've heard recently of a couple school districts doing this, where, you know, we always have the concern that the bus stops, the lights flash, the stop sign comes out, and cars coming in the opposite direction don't stop. So, these couple districts have actually put cameras on, like, the stop sign. So, yeah, so if a car goes through it, now we have footage of that. Does this have any language?
I don't think this identifies cameras. This is more designed for cameras in the cab.
Right.
But it doesn't, I don't think it states, or I don't think it prohibits us from doing dashboard cams.
Yeah, as long as this gives us the latitude to do that, should we be in a position and desire to do that.
But it doesn't state that it has to be internal facing, so, you know, it just says, the board authorizes the use of video and audio recordings of school buses and school vehicles for disciplinary and security purposes. And that clearly, in my mind, is a security.
Safety issue.
Right.
Good question. I like the idea of doing that. If there's
Dashboard cams, that's a great idea.
yeah, if there's a route where there's particularly frequent safety problems. Good, all right. Thank you, Matt. Any further questions on cameras? If not, we'll move on to 810.3, it's school vehicle drivers.
Sorry, going backwards?
Yeah.
How about video?
Video?
The cameras do include the video.
Yes.
That's great. All right, never mind.
Okay, good. 810.3, school vehicle drivers. This policy only refers to drivers of school vehicles which do not qualify as school bus or commercial motor vehicle. Okay.
So the differences between this policy and 810.1 is that this applies to our van drivers and other employees who drive a van. For example, chief, athletic coaches, club advisors. It's basically the same requirements as 810.1.
And Matt, this does not differentiate between whether these folks are Council Rock employees or first student employees, right? So we could have special education.
Correct. They are required to adhere to this policy. Yes.
Great.
But then who has the responsibility? We said that previously it was first student. I assume if it's a Council Rock employee driving a van of students,
then that's our
It's
responsibility.
our responsibility
Yes.
to see that all of this is, the
The
guidelines.
Transportation Department has a form, and every year they send out an email. I'm sure you see it come from, if you're going to drive a van, you've got to fill out
Right.
the form. It's the only way you're allowed to drive.
Right.
They
But it-
manage who's driving for us, teacher-wise, coach-wise.
Mhm. And Robert, you're satisfied that we have sufficient supervision
I
over
am.
our own folks?
I am.
Thank you.
Yeah, Matt Adams is doing a real nice job as our new manager, and of course, under Bill Stone's.
Further questions about 8, 10, 1, 2, or 3? If not, they'll go forward with our recommendation for approval. And is this the last one of a
Yes, sir.
3-year
Yes, it is.
process?
Wow.
Yes, it
Imagine
is.
that.
Unfortunately, no. There are, I believe, 3 or 4
Oh,
policies.
sure.
There are 3 or 4 policies that are on hold right now, waiting for legislature to be approved or denied.
Oh.
So when those come forward, and I don't anticipate them anytime soon, we'll have to come back and visit those.
Those
Yeah.
don't even count, Matt. Come
Yeah.
on. It's out of our control.
That's like a...
Really out
We
of our
check the boxes that we can check.
Yeah, yeah, well, and, you know, as we've discussed going forward, and on occasion as needed, we can take a policy revision to the relevant committee. If it's a policy about academic matters, then it can go to education committee, or so forth and so on, but...
So Dr. Elliott reviewed policy 812, and she was actually fine with the changes that PSBA had made.
What do our administrative regulations look like? Are they elaborate, or?
I don't know if they're elaborate. I think it just kind of details what the relationship is, and, you know, there are always terms of agreement with any of these situations.
Okay.
So it would just detail those. I don't think it's anything that's going to be more than probably a page, or perhaps going on to a second page, but that's it.
So this specifically pertains to our students and coursework or training outside of Council Rock.
Right. So you could think about dual enrollment, you know, so we have a relationship with a institution of higher education.
Right.
And so we, you know, negotiate with them a process, protocol, price for the family, reduced tuition, who's going to teach it, where is it going to be held.
I think one of the colleges, some of the business courses that were just recently approved they're getting college credit for those. They're being taught by our teachers
Yes.
in our high schools, and they're getting college credit.
Marvelous.
Which is the best way for it to happen. You know,
For it to physically happen in our teachers, our high school,
Absolutely.
with college credit.
Definitely.
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, the original, 20 years ago version of dual enrollment was you need to pick up first thing in the morning, end of the day, drive yourself to the college campus, whether it's Dale Vale or wherever, and then you got to get back. And so by the time you're getting back, now it's cutting into your next class period, or it's the end of the day, and you want to be in drama or chorus or sport, and, all that just logistically made it very difficult.
And it speaks so well of our instructors and our curriculum here that Quinn and Mercy had no problem approving that for college credit.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that is awesome.
And so that's part of the protocol, that's part of the agreement. So typically your teachers need to be, a certain level of degree, a certain level of experience, and as long as that's the case, then the university or the college is comfortable with the awarding of credit.
Marvelous. That's a good thing.
It is, it's very...
How many of our students,
Right now, not many, but we have this as part of our redefining student success goal
Oh,
of
good.
the strategic plan is,
and what about Bucks and Del Val? Do our students take much advantage while they're in high school of courses there?
At this time, no.
Mostly phys ed during the summer.
Ah,
Yeah.
interesting.
I thought there was a time when our students were going to Bucks for Mandarin. That seemed to be,
It was a hot topic for a
at
while.
one time, yeah, that's where we were.
I don't know if there's anybody doing it right now. I think
Now.
it's kind of dying down.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that.
Mhm.
Interesting. Okay. Any questions on the phone about 912, relations with educational institutions?
No, good, thank you.
All right,
Mr. Tate, that concludes our policy review for all the policies for Council Rock School District.
all right. Thank you, Matt. You've done a lot of work.
Thank you, Mr. Tate.
Done a lot of work, really.
Both of you have done a lot of work.
95, thank you, 95% Matt. I'm glad we got this done. It was personally, it grated on me to see policies that were 15 years old. And I think we've done the right thing by updating policies. And, we will continually look at revising policies as needed. And I'm sure the administration will bring us policies that require updating, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Hearing none.
Thanks, Everett.
Thank you.
A monumental undertaking.
Thank you. Thanks for participating. Good
Take
night,
care.
gentlemen.
Thank you. Have a good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Good deal.
Night.